Come on, Maria. Welcome back to another episode of Ideas to Human Better. I'm your host, Eva Payne. And today we are talking with an amazing human, Kat Walsh. At first, when I reached out to her, I was really thinking, let's talk about psychedelics, because that was where I discovered her through her podcast, Trip on This. And then within the time that she was doing that podcast over the last month or so, we'll find out for sure, she started a new podcast, Life with Kat Walsh, where she talks about her spiritual awakening. And most recently, she had a podcast on where she talks about flow. And as you know, that is my jam. So I'm so excited to have her on today to learn more about her journey into psychedelics and also her spiritual awakening. So ladies, gentlemen, everyone out there, welcome Kat Walsh to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eva. I'm super excited to be here. This is both psychedelics and my spiritual awakening journey are probably my most favorite things to talk about, hence having a podcast quite literally about both of them. So yeah, I'm happy to jump in and kind of give you a little background about where it all began.
Let's do that. So let's just start with like who you are and how you got on this journey of starting Trip on This.
For sure. So again, my name's Kat Walsh. I was born and raised in LA. One of those, I always say we're different out here when when you're from here. And the way that I would always describe my life for most of it was I always had a lot of really cool jobs. I worked for the ESPN X Games. I worked for a talent agency, was doing a lot of like cool things, but I never one, I never even had a spiritual background. And everything I always noticed was just very hard for me. Even
Mm,
though I was good at my job, there was just like there was no flow, right? Like everything felt like a roadblock for me. Everything kind of felt like um yeah, like but I didn't have any awareness at that time that that's not how you felt. I just thought like life is kind of challenging and some we for the most part, we're running into things. Sometimes we have good days, but like that's kind of how it was.
mhm,
So it wasn't until I want to say I was about 31. I'm 36 now.
mhm,
I began to get into almost kind of like a crisis of like, is this it? Vibe, like a real like, if this is it, then I don't know what to do with myself, kind of
mm,
thing. Like it was really nothing was fulfilling anymore. And I didn't know what to do. And so I think my soul was honestly calling out for something, but I didn't know where to start. That answer came to me in the plant ayahuasca. So ayahuasca came to me through I was at a friend's birthday. I met my friend's medicine woman and ayahuasca was introduced to me. And I had heard of it before, but honestly, I had heard scary stories about it
mhm,
the idea of purging, Chelsea Handler had made it big and it didn't. I was like, but this time, in this moment that I
mhm,
was in, where I was really asking the universe, I'm going to put that in quotes because I wasn't praying, I wasn't really asking consciously at this time
mhm,
for help, and help arrived. And so that ayahuasca journey, and this was in 2018, November 2018, what that journey showed me was that it was actually the next day I got to realize all the ways I didn't love myself, all the
mm,
ways I was so hard on myself and uh, the self limiting beliefs. Although I didn't even really realize how many I had still, I just suddenly got the awareness that I wasn't really loving myself in a way. And
mhm,
and what the grandmother, had really asked of me that year, and so was to show up for me. And so 2019 then became this just absolute love affair with myself. And
mm,
that looked a lot of different ways to me. I always ate well, but started eating intuitively better, like for my body.
mm,
I went off of dating apps, particularly not because I have a problem with dating apps, but because my personality up until that point was how do I get everything to make me happy? Whether it's a person or information, everything was outside of me as opposed to realizing, oh, everything I'm looking for is within.
right.
And so I had to go on that journey of becoming. Now, what I was becoming, no clue at this point. I had no idea. I was just beginning to see what it was like to take care of myself on an emotional level. And
Mm.
so this is where psychedelics now start to, and by the way, feel free, I'm gonna be, like, on a tangent, so
Yeah,
if
yeah,
there's
yeah.
anything you wanna just jump in and
Okay, but
ask me any
let me
questions.
ask you this first
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
So, you went to, if I'm remembering correctly, you played softball at Villanova. Is that right? Or
Yeah.
am I making that up?
No, 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 that's absolutely right.
Okay, so you're a, I'm gonna say, a high achiever, and like, you know what you're good at. You go
Yep.
to this college, you have this great, what you think's a great career. There's a lot of stress in that career. You're giving up so much of yourself. You're not being treated well. But you probably felt like you were really in the place where you needed to be. And I think a lot of people, young people especially, really struggle with just like, what do I do with my life?
Yeah.
So what are some indicators for you that if they're in that place right now, like they might think they're doing the right thing, like, oh, I'm working at this talent agency, or I'm doing this thing, but it's just not in alignment with their soul. I think really to have flow, it's about listening to your soul. Like, what need do you want to fill in the world? So
Yeah,
how
I
did
can.
you know, how can people recognize that within themselves?
Yeah, I that's a great question. So, it to me, it comes down to it, like, an excitement, right? Like,
Mm,
I'm gonna give you an example. There was a very clear first, it takes getting very honest with yourself and being like, "Okay." Like, I'll tell you, when I was at CAA, the talent agency, I had to finally had the realization that my favorite part about that job was telling people what I did,
mm,
because it sounded good, because it was impressive, because I liked the way that people spoke to me. And so again, it's like the external validation, right? But
right.
there was something very telling. I remember the real moment, the aha moment that I was like, "Uh-oh, Kat, why are we here?" Was when it was July 4th weekend, and this particular year, it was like 5-day long weekends because, like, July 4th ended up being on, like, a Wednesday or something. And the and when it was time to go back to work, oh my god, I the amount of, like, fear, anxiety, overwhelm, like, everything in my whole body was like, Please don't take me back there. I don't
Mm,
want to." There was nothing about going back. You'd think like, okay, sometimes when people like their job, they're like, "Okay, it was nice to take a break. It might be hard to get started, but, like, yeah, I'm looking forward to, like, kinda getting back into the flow of things and this, not." None of that. And so you have to be like, for me, it was just about getting very honest, be like, "But how do I really feel? How do I feel in my body?" I remember my physical body, like, my stomach, I would feel it all the time, like, the stress would make me almost feel physically nauseous, and I'm sorry, I will never choose a job that makes me feel stressed like that again, period.
mm,
And, hopefully I'm gonna be doing this and continue to use my voice, but, I already had made the decision going into starting trip on this that I was never going to be in a job that took away for me. You know what it is? Getting very clear on what's important to you, and for me, it was about freedom. I
mm,
started my last kind of job, like a desk job, if you will. I started getting like very almost like almost like rebelling against the idea that I get 10 what is it, accumulated work days, and like that I couldn't live my life. Like, even if I had the opportunity to go to Bora Bora for 3 weeks, I just couldn't. And somehow, I don't know if it was just like, years of just like grinding super hard. I was like, I don't want anyone telling me how I can live my life or where I can live my life, telling me what to do. And so for me, I got to realize, oh, freedom is important to me. So I think
mhm,
it's getting very clear on like, what are your values? What's important to a happy life? And the craziest part about that is, even though freedom is what I desire, because I had been in so much structure my entire life,
mhm,
I'm still trying to unwind the patterns of, like being in a little box and like being in a 9 to 5 and still operating as if I'm still in that old job. And that's the conditioning, right? So it's
mhm.
like you get your values aligned, but then like, look, then the journey is like actually
Right.
walking them is a whole other thing. So that's what I would say is like, get clear on like what makes you happy. What do you need on a big macro level, and is where you're at, is that giving that to you? Some people might be like, I'm fine with 10 business day. Like, that's cool. Like, because
Mhm,
I like this and this and this. For me, it was just, and it wasn't even about just vacation. It was just like, I don't want anyone telling me anymore where I need to be.
mhm. Okay.
For me.
So let me ask you this then. So you go through this ayahuasca session. and you
Yeah.
have this epiphany, like, I need to change my life. That's got to be a really frightening place, but also probably very relieving. So, what is your next move after that? Like, what? So, someone goes through a journey, whether it's psilocybin or ayahuasca or whatever the heck, and then they realize I need to change things. What does that
Yeah.
look like, and how does that listening to your intuitions, like not listening to the fear? What was that process like for you to actually start taking those steps?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I want to clarify for people is the ayahuasca journey was not like the aha moment where I was just like,
Mm.
got it, I need to change things. In fact, the experience was very just like just emotions. I was feeling pleasure and I was laughing and all of these things. And there's kind of a certain knowing that happens on a psychedelic where the light bulb moment, I call it. Like you just suddenly have the realization. Mine did not come during the trip. It
Mhm.
was just the next day, and it was just through me, like, crying and whatnot, and all I wrote was, "I love you," in the sand. "I
Mm.
love you." And it it was the first experiential message to myself of being like, "Oh, I've been looking for you, Kat. I've been looking for you." But then the journey begins. So then I had to start to think. So it wasn't like suddenly I'm changing things. I actually didn't know what that meant, like I didn't even know like how that was leading to a goal other than like, okay, yeah, obviously like, like with work stuff, I was like, okay, yeah, I guess that's what I need to do. And so like tangible things was like what I was saying, like going off of dating apps and asking myself a lot of questions, like, what do I need to be happy? And really, like, allowing myself to get very emotional and crying a lot and, getting very grounded, going into nature a lot, and I would talk out loud to myself often. It's very different than talking in your head,
Mhm.
because there's so many thoughts going on in the mind, uh, and a lot of times they're thought looping. If you actually heard them out loud, you're like, why would I be saying that? You know, when
Yeah.
you actually speak out loud, you're actually hearing it from another sense, right? So now your ears are hearing it. So it's almost as if there's another part of you talking to you. And so I would work through questions. Started to notice, I started to just like have an awareness practice. Like I would just start to get very aware. So when like would get like triggered by something or uptight, instead of just, like, jumping into something, I'd be like, "Okay, wait, wait, hold up, hold up. Like, what happened? What happened? What happened? Like, what's this bringing up for you right
Mm.
now?" And so, look, it was a slow path, it wasn't overnight. It was one of those things where it's like I got very curious. I became the scientist of my own mind and self and body and had the real desire to want to change. I wanted to experience fulfillment and happiness. And I was allowing myself to go through that inner exploration. Was I reading spiritual books at the time? Not even. Would I have, like in hindsight, and started that journey quicker? Totally. And
Mhm.
like there's been spiritual books that helped me along my way, but those didn't come until 2019, like latter half, when after like I started eating a ton of mushrooms.
Can I
I
just tell you what I
started
wrote down? I
Yeah,
literally
yeah.
just wrote down, who did you listen to? Like, I was gonna say, like, was there a spiritual guru? Was there someone out there, like, that you went, "Oh my gosh, this person makes perfect sense," where you couldn't have really
No.
heard them before without that knowingness?
Oh my
No, you
gosh,
didn't have
no,
that.
no, no, but, like, but that came after what I would call a very, like, conscious mystical awakening, which came later.
Okay.
I didn't realize at this time, I didn't even know that there were, like, I had no idea there was a spiritual community like there is on social media. It was not in my purview. It wasn't, it was none of my feeds were about I had no idea that people were having a spiritual awakening.
Mm.
So, what I did read though, because my parents are spiritual, was there's a book I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, Seed of the Soul by Gary Zhukov.
Mhm.
It's a little slow in the beginning, so if people get it, I warn you, the first kind of like chapter is a little like it's a little heady, I guess is the way I would say it, but it begins to make sense. I read books like The Untethered Soul by
Mhm.
Michael Singer. Um,
I'm pretty sure Oprah said that Gary was one of her, like, most profound, spiritual leaders.
yeah, yeah, yes, yes, and so did Oh, she's a great poet. Maya Angelou.
Mm-hmm.
Also, which that book actually really shifted something for me because it was the
Mm-hmm.
first time I had actually been uh, seen spiritual concepts, the idea of the seat of the soul being separate from the ego construct, the feelings and the emotions. I had did not know about that, which is crazy to me because it's not that long ago. It didn't
Did
come
you grow
from
up
that.
with any religion? Did you have any
No.
sort of, so just like zero spirituality in your life?
My mom is spiritual, but never like put it on us really, just
Mhm.
kind of like allowed us to figure it out. And so, yeah, there was never really, I always said, like, I'm spiritual. I believe that there's something, but there wasn't real practice. There wasn't a
Mhm.
practice. There wasn't any real like studying around it. I was very focused on the material world. How do I be successful in this world? How do I become an agent in this world? How do I make money? Like,
Mhm.
not realizing that those things are actually so intricately tied. I probably would have made a whole lot more money had I been on a spiritual
Right.
path and ditched all of my self-limiting beliefs around what I was capable of. But that didn't
Sure.
come until psychedelics.
Okay,
So,
so you did the ayahuasca, you start waking up to like there's something else. And then
yes,
it took you a year of just kind of sitting in that space and making sort of small shifts. And then you said you started taking a ton of mushrooms.
about 6 months. So then midway through uh, July 2019 now, a friend of mine had created a show. It's like this like audio visual experience, dance party epic, like at his house. And for the experience, we would pair magic mushrooms with a little bit of MDMA. And I would I now this was only the 3rd time I'd ever eaten mushrooms. The first couple times I had them, my first trip on mushrooms at 16 started great and did not end well. There I had no education around it, and it ended up being a very scary trip for me, hence not doing it again for like 15 years. Then I did it again, probably like 2 or 3 years before it was maybe like right after my ayahuasca trip actually, and it was just very intense for me. It wasn't particularly fun, wasn't a bad trip, but just was like a lot because I hadn't processed any of my emotions yet.
How much were you taking?
Half an eighth on both times.
Okay.
Yeah, half an eighth, and, they were for whatever reason, like, I can eat half an eighth now, and I'm absolutely fine, but half an eighth then, even on the 2nd trip as an adult, but for the first time as an adult, was so strong for me. It was,
Mm,
like, wildly strong. Now, it's like I can have half an eighth, like, pretty easily.
mhm.
Even in this, like, latter half, so I don't know if it's, like, that first time. It was basically, like, a first time twice because I didn't do it again for 15 years, so it might as
Yeah.
well have been the first time again as an adult.
Mhm.
So, this is now the 3rd time I'm having mushrooms, and that was, like that night was the most awe-inspiring, mesmerizing, incredible experience I have ever had. Like, the imprint of an experience like that, I was watching with people, I only knew 2 of them, and we were so bonded after this experience. But that's what also, like, psychedelics do, you know?
Mhm.
So it's like you're on a journey together. You're kinda traveling and traversing in what feels like, different dimensions and time and space that feels, you're just in this, like, vibrational match when you're, like, creating when you're together on a psychedelic experience, or at least that's what I feel when I'm on it. And so that year, we ended up watching this show tons of times, like, probably at least 30 times, on because we would, like, do big weekends, and we would just stay at their house, and we'd be like I mean, look, I wouldn't recommend this to everybody, but just, like, tripping so much and having fun and dancing and laughing and what it was doing. And here at this point, I had no idea that psychedelics actually create like what it was doing to the brain, creating new neural pathways and creating neural plasticity, right? So I had no clue that my brain was in this highly malleable state. And the emotions I was pairing that highly malleable state was bliss, happiness, love, fun, right? And
Mhm.
so as this is happening, and I'm doing this more and more, I would go home then on the weekdays and would just be crying and having these epiphanies, and like
Mhm.
the suddenly like lights were coming on in my mind, and in the landscape of my mind that I never saw, like new perspectives, new uh yeah, just like aha moments and things, and it was changing me, like
Mm.
radically changing me. And at that point, now I'm seeing mega shifts. Mega shifts are happening. And so that's where the spiritual books started to come in. That's
Mhm.
where the Gary Zhukov started to come in. So now it's starting to make sense, make sense, make sense. Until finally one day, the light bulb moment, and I remember it was like November 2019. I'm watching the show, I'm tripping, we're having fun. And I just remember thinking to myself, I can do anything that I want. I can do anything that I want. And I like, it's almost like I heard a voice and then I was startled by it,
Mhm.
by my own voice saying that. I was like, "What?" And what that did was it began to unravel all of the cage that I had put myself in, all of the stories and the self-limiting beliefs and the things that I told myself to protect me. The biggest thing I always say is I never thought I was an entrepreneur. I always said I was a work to live person. Like
Mhm.
I want to have a nice enough living so I could just like do the things that I want to do, but I don't want to do that. Not knowing that I just didn't believe that I could. I just had so baked, I just thought, well, I had a good college degree, but like, I'm this level of smart and, I did this degree and this and that. So this is probably what I can do, and just completely boxed myself in. And what mushrooms did was it broke down the box with my help. They were co-creating. They were co-destructing with me, co-destructing all
Mhm.
of these old stories that I had created, and yeah, and so that's where the real journey began.
Mm. Okay, one question that keeps popping into my
Yeah.
head, so I'm gonna ask you. You talked a lot about how these experiences, you were emotional on them. Were you not an emotional person before? Or did they just make you more emotional? Because it sounds like having these experiences, you tapped into, like, deep empathy for yourself.
Yeah, I was emotional. I am a Pisces, but a different type of emotional. What I would say is
Mhm.
like the emotion I was feeling was like the gratitude, a deep level of gratitude for like the divine, like the kind of gratitude that has you crying on your knees, like thanking God for what's happening.
Mhm.
Before the emotionality part was fear and feeling like out of control, and or like just like externally based with like relationships. And I wouldn't say I was super emotional before, like not like an I don't think anybody would say to me sorry, I'm getting a little
You're
sick.
fine, you're fine.
I wouldn't say anyone would say to me like I was like super emotional, but what this did was it tapped into deep, maybe wounding that I had, like layers that
Mm.
I did not know, and so it was breaking it open in a new way. And so these tears were like tears that have been trapped in my body for this lifetime and maybe many lifetimes before that. Like times where it was like crying for moments in my life that I didn't even know I needed to cry. Like
Wow.
really realizing like how much I needed to work out. I didn't realize how hurt I was, like I didn't
Mhm.
realize like the level of healing that I actually needed because everything was so tacked on. I think
Mhm.
a lot of people think that you have to have some like huge traumatic thing happen to you. And that's certainly one thing to pinpoint. But like I didn't have any like mega traumas that I can point to. And yet like life, life in general, the times of being made fun of, heartbreaks, feelings of fear, like they compound, and I
Mhm.
just stored them away.
Yeah.
So that's how I would kind of describe the emotions. Was like deep healing.
Mhm. I love that. Thank you for explaining that. Okay, so you've been able to let down like this big bag of rocks,
Mhm.
like the stuff that you didn't even know you were carrying around. You're having these experiences. And then you had someone who reached out to you from years before and said, "Hey, do you want to start a podcast?" Which I
Yeah.
just love that someone just came to you, because my acronym for FLOW is following life's opportunities wholeheartedly. It's like
Yeah.
the opportunities are right in front of you all the time. We just don't see them or
Yep.
have the courage to say yes to them.
Mhm.
So can you just explain that process and how you then started Trip on This?
Definitely. So after that light bulb moment, what I did was I prayed and I said, I realized that I needed to create something myself. This was now in November 2019.
Mhm.
But I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what the opportunity was. And so I said, please, one, give me the please like allow me to recognize this opportunity when it comes
Yeah.
and to have the courage to go for it when it does. Now, that was November. This now July 2020. So actually 1 year later from like all my psilocybin journeys and really,
Mhm.
really unpacking. 4th of July weekend, 2020, I came back and I set an intention. I was feeling at my most magnetic, my most expansive, my most great. And I wrote in my journal and I said to the universe, I'm ready. I'm ready to call in that opportunity. I'm ready to make the leap, whatever that is. I'm ready to call in the partner that I'm meant to, be with or whatever, like to create this with. I'm ready. And then a week later, 1 week later, I get a call out from the blue. I haven't spoken to this comedian in 6 years at this point. Zero contact. Calls me out of the blue and asks me, basically says he can't do his touring because of COVID, and was like, "Do you want to try doing a podcast?" And at this point, it was just going to be like one episode to like feel it out and like see. And I remember I had always wanted actually to kind of like do a podcast, but I had all the self-limiting beliefs I talked about.
Right.
I quickly was like, why, who am I? How can I? Blah, blah, blah. Like all the stories and just completely threw that out the window. But this time it was being presented to me. And this
Mhm.
guy had a following and he had the money to back it and he had the marketing. And like, I was like, okay, wow, we do it, fall in love with it. And fall in love with it.
Mm.
The next day he calls me and he's like, I just watched this episode. It was fantastic. Do you want to really do this together? It's basically like I'll put the branding in behind it. I'll put the money behind it, the whole thing. Do you want to do this? And I was like, oh my God, like, yes, yes. How about then 2 hours after that, I get a call from my supervisor that I was being let go for my job
Wow.
because of COVID. But this happened to be like literally I say yes and then I get a call 2 hours later, and I even the part of the blessings of all of this is then I even got a small severance, which made it possible, which made it less scary. Instead of it being like, I just lost now I don't how what am I gonna do? I'm in the middle of a pandemic. Suddenly, I was given, like, a small little buffer, and I was like, "Okay." Anyway, long story short, doesn't work out with the comedian. Work differences, style
Mhm.
differences, our humor was very different, like, and I realized I'm like, "Okay." We tried to do it a couple times, and I was just like, "This isn't working," and it was very hard for me to walk away from that because I thought that was it, like, who am I? Who am I to do that? I barely have got any money in the bank, like, nobody knows who I am, like, how can I do this on my own? And yet I just found the thing that I wanna do. What a conundrum that I'm in right now. And so but I finally, like the guides, the intuitive guidance was so loud, though. It was like, "This isn't working." No flow, right, even
Mhm.
no flow, nothing
Yeah.
was flowing about it. After it wasn't flowing, and I was like, "Okay, maybe I did it like a I just, I called it this is grace again, like, this to me, the grace of the divine." How I just when I finally decided, I was like, "Maybe do I do this alone? Like, do I give it a shot?" I happened to be eating mushrooms. I was with a friend. We ate a lot of mushrooms in this time period, by the way. Not as much now, but we were. Um, and I just realized I'm like, maybe I started on my own. And I didn't quite know what it would even be about. And I had joked with a friend of mine like 3 months before. I was like, wouldn't it be funny if we did a podcast and just like ate magic mushrooms and just like talk shit and like had fun and blah blah blah? And she's the one, and she's like, Kat, you want to start a psychedelic podcast? I was like, oh
I
my
do.
God. And I was like, there not only is it, there's no version of Kat starting trip on this without psychedelics.
Yeah.
There's no version of me sitting here talking to you if it wasn't for psychedelics, which then opened up my spiritual journey, right?
Mhm.
That opens up the flow of the universe, because the moment I said yes to my dream, the moment I was allowing myself to be guided, the moment I said something, yes, to something that was absolutely crazy. I'm not going to go back and get a job. I'm going to have my severance. I'm going to go into something. There's like, how is this going to work? I'm going to run out of money in like 3 months. And yet miracles began. Miracles. And the truth is, I have been living on miracles. This is the only thing I have been doing in this past 2 years. And there have been so many times it has gotten so scary and so real. And if you talk to most of the world, they'd be like, girl, this is not practical at all. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not living a practical life. I'm trying to see. I'm being guided to live differently, that I can actually
Mhm.
trust that this universe is abundant. That we are mega creators and manifestors. And I would just get these intuitive downloads. And by the way, I had a mystical awakening and all this, which helped this process,
Mhm.
because it gave me what I would call like quote confirmation, because I had such a direct experience of like of an alternate, like just messages coming to me. And so I would then begin communicating with my, what I call my team of guidance. I refer to them all the time, my angels and guides. And I would always just be told, like, hang on, you're going to have everything that you need, Kat. You're going to have everything that you need. And there were so many times I was on the floor crying. So many times I was like, I want to believe, but like, I'm looking at the practical realities of the world, and I don't know how this is going to keep going. And then a miracle would happen. I would somehow get through it and just laugh and be like, well, we're on the craziest adventure of all time. And then it would just continue to work. And so,
Yeah, I love that. At the summer camp that I've run for 20 plus years, we would call them Kindle miracles, because it would literally be like, I'm $10,000 shy and camp starts tomorrow. And then I get a phone call from some bar in Palm Springs that just raised $10,050. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And it was, I can write a book about the Kindle miracles. The organization is called Project Kindle. And so,
love
but you're
that.
right. Like, that's the flow that I'm talking about when I talk about this flow. It's like when you wholeheartedly believe in your heart, like, I am meant to do this, and you just give it everything, the universe works with you. It
Yeah.
conspires with you. And it's just asking you to trust, like you called it, radical trust, right? Radical faith. Like, let's just see where this goes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really different way of living, and that's why I started Life with Kat Walsh, to express a different way of being. And it's kind of like what I would say, I'm like the guinea pig. I'm a guinea pig for a new way of being on the show, because I'll share in what's actually going on for me and how
Mhm.
I'm living my life, and also the journey of trust and surrender. That you can actually trust that you're gonna get that $10,500, that you can
Mhm.
actually trust, like, that is the spiritual journey. So, I think it's that term's thrown around a lot, trust and surrender,
Mhm.
but that is it. That is the lifelong journey of, like, how much can you trust? How much can you really believe that when things aren't particularly going your way, or things are looking really bleak, that everything is working out in your highest and best interest, and to really actually believe that, and believe that, like, look, you can't see where it's going yet, but if you
Mhm.
hold that light, and look, I'm dealing with that right now. I just got news today right before I got on here, so I was a little I couldn't even really think of my charger name, because I was uh just processing this news that I got. And I just basically had two things that are like back-to-back blows that I was like
Mhm.
really counting on. And it created a lot of fear for me.
Mhm.
And I heard very closely, I now that I'm on this spiritual path, and awareness is like a big thing for me. A big thing. It's like, don't you don't you dare just run into reaction now. Do
Mhm.
not, Cat. And so I sat down, I closed my eyes, my heart's beating. And the one of the things I heard was like, "This is part of your initiation."
Mhm.
It's like how sometimes you have to be on the edge of your faith
Mhm.
for to continue to move forward. And because what happens, and I can say, like, wanting like a couple, thinking that a couple, like, especially financial things are coming through and now they're not,
Mhm.
like, that you're banking on, then you're like, oh shit, right? Like that
Right.
moment happens. I immediately went into what most of us would do. Oh my God, what am I going to do? How do I do this? Like, do I have to like, how what, blah, right? All the things
Mhm.
like, what am I
Mhm.
going to do?
Yep.
And I was just so quieted by my higher self to say, first of all, do nothing. Don't ever do anything in reaction. If
Mhm.
you're in a fearful state, do not do a single thing. It's not that any of the ideas I might be thinking are bad ones. They might be the right idea. But vibrationally speaking, the reverberation of that was, now that's a fear response. You
Mhm.
need to just breathe and know, like, are you okay right now? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay right now. You're like, then okay. Sit
Mhm.
down, hang on for a second, like, breathe. And like, again, like, I'm being faced with that, like, trust again, where it's like,
Mhm.
"Okay, like, do you know that this is you think this, like, just happened back to back right now?" You know what I mean? And it's interesting, I've got, like, a few really big calls that are, like, coming up today. It's synchronistically, it's just, like, it's weird timing that's, like, it's very dualistic. There's some duality happening right now. It's like,
Mhm.
there's almost, like, a choice of, like, are you gonna expand or are you gonna contract right now?
Mhm.
You gonna believe fear or are you gonna trust in love? Do you believe the miracles are gonna keep happening? Or are you gonna, like, throw in the towel now after all that, right? And, like, for me, it's just like, "You know what? I didn't come this far to allow fear to win," you know? And so, yeah, it's flow is also it's challenging in that it's a new way of being. It's not that it's
Yes.
hard, but it does ask you to be very different than how most of us have been raised all of our life, you know?
Totally, totally. Okay, a couple questions that are popping up. So first one is, and this was something that this is an example I would talk about. So I'm just going to use this one. But so let's just pretend like you really feel pulled to do a podcast, like you happen, you are very good at it. But like I look at American Idol, this is like, what people think they're going to be like the next big singer. And I'm just like, oh, honey, this is just not your calling. Like you're just not, but they believe it so much.
Mhm.
So my question for you is when you believe something so wholeheartedly or you want it so, so bad, how do you know when to sort of let something go a little bit or allow for it to mold in a different way? Or, because I think we can become so fixated on this is my goal, this is my thing, and you don't allow for the room for it to expand and move in a way that it needs to.
100 that's such a good you've asked really good questions on this. I always practice non-attachment. I
Mm,
am always when I feel myself getting, uh, too attached, how I actually my intention for life is less about the success of, a particular show, actually. I never, like, I always say, like, expansion along my soul's mission.
mhm,
Like, expansion, please continue to guide me and align me to where I need to be. So,
mhm,
it's less about, "This is my goal," and it's very fixed, and more about, "Please continue to," uh the trust is trusting that when I follow flow, that wherever I'm meant to be will be, right? Like, so that's the way that I always say it's like it's interesting. I went to an Akashic reader and she's like, was talking about, I've never been into anything like that. She goes, "What you're creating is going to look very different to you." Um,
mm,
in this was like about 4 months ago, and she's like, "In 6 months from now," I was like, "I believe that. That's okay. That's great." Like,
mm,
and the thing is, it's like the times where I would be like, where it would feel, I guess, like in a contracted period, right? The universe would then start sending me miracles, in the forms of people like talking to me, like opportunities, like things like where it continues to build. Because the thing is, if it's not building, if there's no growth, if you're not actually seeing anything happening, and there's kind of like no signs or synchronicities at all, then perhaps that's part of the message, is
Mhm.
that there it's time to go back to the drawing board and say like, okay, am I on the right path? I think it is a willingness to be like, do I need to change? Do I need to do something different? What am I doing right now? And so that's kind of the way that I would answer it, is like, yeah, it's a willingness to change, the willingness to allow eh, yourself to be guided. And
Mhm.
as I always like, I intend to be like, I want to live the happiest, most fulfilling life that I could possibly, of service. Like,
Mhm.
what did I come here to do? And like allow the divine intelligence of this magnificent universe to guide me, because Kat has no idea. I could say, "Oh, the giant success of Trip on This and Life with Kat Walsh, so that's gonna equal my happiness and fulfillment." The truth is, I cannot tell you that it is true. I have no idea if that's actually true. I might get that and be like, "Oh, actually, still on the path." And
Right.
so it's just the letting go of, it's like having being pulled towards something, but then, like, holding it lightly and then checking yourself when you're holding it too firmly. And
Mhm.
so that's really been uh, the thing for me, is, like, intuitively, like, talking about it, and for me, intuitively talking about trust and surrender has been kind of the message for me, is, like, keep talking about it. Because the thing is, like, if it doesn't, it doesn't, I guess, right? Okay. But if it does, you know what I mean? Like, it's a living roadmap of a journey of living in a world that is completely
Mhm.
moving through it differently. And so that's kind of why I talk about it so often, is so that people don't hear it in hindsight, right? They don't hear about like, here's all the steps I did, but you're hearing in real time, like all the messy stuff. And, hopefully one day, like I would love to be on a stage talking about, just so that other people can know that when you do align to the thing that you're meant to be doing, that miracles are possible.
Mhm. Okay, let's go specifically then to, you're doing Trip on This. I'm sure your mind and heart is like, this is the thing that I'm going to do. And all of a sudden you start getting this little knowingness or idea that you're starting to bring in this kind of spiritual awakening into it, and you realize, wait, I need to, maybe this needs to be its own show or its own thing. So what was that process like for you?
It was a it's hilarious. It was a mushroom trip. Okay, so here's the thing. I knew I had been it was very important to me to talk about this journey, of the inner journey of creating Trip on This, because I wanted to give other people permission to go for it in their life, right? So like, having no background as a podcast host, and not really having a whole lot of money in the bank, and like not really like, and not allowing the stories of why we don't go for something to go for it. And so it was very important to me to be like, to talk very honestly about, like, don't let it look all just like shiny on the outside, like all this show and this and that. Like, let me bring you into the inner world of like, let me bring you into the human side of what it is to create something like this, and the good days and the hard days, and like, so that it was more than just that. And so I found myself talking about that on the podcast purposely,
Mhm.
because I always knew that I was like, no, this is the thing. This is why I want to talk about it, because that's what psychedelics, as like allies for me, did. I The fact that, like, so many of us are in our own box, and then to be able to actually think expansively and to actually create the life of our dreams, to actually go for it, like, gives permission for others. And that was really the goal. And so I was talking about that a lot. Um, and I finally did an episode where I was like, Kat, this you're kind of like, now you're forcing it
Mm.
into Trip on This, when Trip on This is about psychedelics, girl. If it molds with it, if it goes with it, fine. But like, if it's just about the spiritual piece, like, what's being asked right now is not to stop talking about it, but perhaps create its own um container for it.
Container.
And
Yeah.
and the thing is like, spirituality is the thing that excites me above all else. Psychedelics is part of that journey, but it actually is under the spirituality umbrella. So trip um psychedelics alone, trip on this alone wasn't enough for me on a creative
Mhm.
level, on a soul level. There was more I wanted to say. There was so much more. I didn't like the idea of being pigeonholed creatively. So I did a mushroom trip on New Year's, this past New Year's, the 2022 New Year's. And I went in right before that. Sorry. I hope you're cutting some of this. If you're not, I'm so sorry to the audience that it has
That's
to
all
hear
good. We're just
that.
being real.
All right. But so where was I?
New
Okay, so
Year's?
I did this mushroom trip.
Mhm.
But right before the leading up to it, I went into a very deep spiritual time. Very deep. I was reading a book called the Sophia Code. Is it called yes, the Sophia Code. It's a very, very deep spiritual time, a lot of reverence. I mean, 8 hours a day reading this and meditating. And it was actually during a time where I could actually take off like a week basically to do this.
Mm.
And that led me into this mushroom trip. And that was such a spiritual experience. I was visiting parallel lives. Like I felt
Mm.
like I was like with the ascended masters, like really, and understanding that my energy, it was like the this was like the point where it was going to start to grow now, where like the energy is going to
Mm.
start moving. And I don't it's again, it's like one of those things like when like the aha moment, I was coming out of it, I was like, "Oh, I got it. I'm going to be creating a new project." And how crazy is this? Life with Kat Walsh. I found that domain, or I created that domain like 2 or 3 months before I ever knew I was creating this podcast. I had
Wow.
just saved it because it was like um I had like a free domain as part of my WordPress. I was like Life with Kat Walsh because I had started to rename like my branding around myself, Life with Kat Walsh, because I didn't want it to be pigeonholed to one thing. And I finally it was just kind of like this aha moment. And that podcast is like it's an experiment. I don't know if people are going to dig it. I have no idea. Like,
Right, right.
but what's interesting is that like it is the first step. And I remember I came back to my Akashic reader being like, things are gonna look different for you as things go. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what that looks like, but like, does it move more into the spiritual side? Do I do some documentary? Like this is the thing that I always say to people. I'm like, you don't know what's coming. You have no clue. I have no idea if somebody sees this and goes, "Hey, do you want to be the host of this show about psychedelics?" Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we like your vibe. So, like, do you want
Right.
to? So it's like it was allowing. Again, it was like, okay, I'm just going to follow flow, and flow was telling me, why don't you just create a podcast where you can express a new way of being and allow that to be the sister to trip on this. I always call it my masculine and feminine. My masculine being trip on this, which is very structured and,
Mhm.
comes out every, Tuesday, and it's got like a certain look and thing. And like Life with Cat Walsh is like, I will release an episode when I want, when I have something to say at different times, like whenever flow is, because it's just around like expression as opposed to this needs to be this.
Right.
There's no like end goal of what it needs to be. I want it to be a community. I wanted to create. I knew I was like, okay, would love to meet other people like myself who are living like this, like you, like how we've been brought together now because
Yeah.
we're both
Yeah.
living in a similar way.
I
There's
literally
others
will
like
see things and I'll be like, I know she doesn't even know me, but I'm sending this to her. Because there's very few people that I think would even like care to watch. I
yeah,
send stuff to my kids all the time and they're like, yeah, yeah, mom. I'm like, one day you're gonna go back
right.
to her text thread and be like, oh my gosh, look at all the stuff she's sending me. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but it's true. It's like there's community. We're searching for each other.
Mhm.
Like many souls are searching for each other right now. Many souls that are on their awakening paths. And so I was like, let me be one lighthouse for others that not as a teacher, but as a friend. That was
Mhm.
my big thing with Life with Kat Walsh is I'm 2 years into this. I have no idea what I'm doing out here half the time. Most of the time. I don't know like, when do I actually know? Like, let me ask that question. But for the most part, it's more like you're not alone in the figuring it
Mhm.
out. You're not alone. None of us figure it out. There's no teacher out there that has it figured out. We're all each other's teachers.
Mhm.
But because I'm so in it, most teachers are ahead. So they're telling you like, this is what's up. This is what's going on. This is it. So for me, it's more like, uh, I always think of people like in the Midwest or like in the South that like, it's a bigger community out here in LA of spirituality and having this. But if you don't have that where you are, and you have so much crazy stuff happening in your inner world and experiences that you wouldn't dare say to anybody because they would look at you like you're crazy. That's what I wanted to create. A place where you can go like, no, you can say whatever you want. There's nothing that's crazy here. This magical universe we're out here, like it's incredible here.
Mm.
I welcome whatever you have to say. And so that was really kind of that pull towards Life with Kat Walsh.
I love that. One of the things is I just love how as you were speaking, I wrote down the word delegate. And then you went on to talk about how with Life with Kat Walsh, it isn't as structured. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times we think things like, especially starting a podcast too, going, has to be released every Monday, da 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 da. They tell you like, here's how you have to do it. If you want to be
Yes.
successful, it needs to look like this. Why? Like,
Yeah,
does it line up with, do you want to go to the beach today? Freaking go to the beach.
yeah,
You don't have to show up
exactly.
in exactly the way that someone else tells you. So initially I was wanting to ask you, when you started Life with Kat Walsh, did you just say like, I'm just going to record this as I intuitively feel drawn to do it? Or were you like, oh my gosh, I'm starting another podcast and now I have to, all the things I'm doing for a trip on this and the structure of it, I need to do the same. Like, how has that been for you? Really just letting go and allowing it to very organically happen for you?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I would definitely recommend this for others too if you're wanting to start something. I did not so trip on this was exactly what you described. I need to do it on this day and I need to do these assets and I need to do like all this because this is how it's going to have to be successful and look, I think that is when it comes to okay, so like two ways of being, right? Like in this world, there's the practical way of going about things which most people do, right? And that's that practical piece where you're not like leaning on let's the woo woo stuff, right? The quantum, the fact that like this you create on the miracle zone, right? When you're creating from that. But there's the slower path, which is the practical, takes time to build and, like, yeah, sure, it works when there's, a trip on this certainly like it's worked, like it's definitely like I'm this year particularly it's hitting a definite upward trajectory now. Like I think now that it's been the foundation is set, right?
Yeah.
And I went about it that way, right? And uh, so I that's how Trip on This started. When I was thinking about Life with Kat Walsh, I was like, I journaled. I did some channeled writing around it, and I didn't even start it until I actually had like 2 or 3 days of just writing about why I was creating this, and
Mm.
I would just start asking myself questions like, what is Life with Kat Walsh? And then I would close my eyes and I would just begin to hear just the first words that came to me without judgment. I think it's important for people to know, like, if that doesn't sound right, just write it down anyway. It's only for you. So it's like, write down whatever is coming through because part of that's your truth. Whether or not you like whatever that truth is that came up, you got to be aware of it or else it's going to be like creating in the background, right? So the more we bring to our awareness and leave judgment aside, the the clearer we get on the manifesting of it. So I would just begin to write around it. I was like and I remember writing things like Life with Kat Walsh is a podcast about flow. It has no rules. Um it follows no guidelines. The episodes might be 5 minutes, they might be an hour. I might post it on a Thursday night. I might post on a Monday morning. I might not post for 2 weeks. I might post 3 weeks at a time or three episodes at a time. It didn't matter. I literally wrote this to myself. This is
Mm-hmm.
what was coming through. It wants no rules. It doesn't want to be of the world that says you have to do it this way because I don't want to live my life being told how to live it. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess this is a theme that's coming up like I was saying about me wanting freedom, right?
Freedom, right?
I'm really seeing in myself in this period of like what does freedom mean in all ways for you, Kat? And not wanting to be dictated to anymore from anything outside of myself. And so I just really was it's a little bit of a rebellion, actually, the podcast. It was a rebellion against all of the this is how you do to succeed. I was like, "Oh, really?" It was a little bit of a really? Okay, like maybe not. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna try it differently and see how it goes. And like, I don't know. I just started it, and honestly, come back to your question about time. I am finding myself a little buried right now because Trip on This is really like expanding right now, and I've had some really big, interesting guests and things. So there's like a lot that's happening, and yet like still wanting to but not forcing. That's like flow again and being like, "That's okay, Kat. Trip on This is needing your attention." That's the point of Life with Kat Walsh, not
Right.
being so structured. The point is when you got something to say it. When you don't, don't. This is not about like I think because my intention is not like I'm gonna make this the biggest podcast ever, but really a place of self-expression and a safe haven and getting to hear someone talk extremely honestly around what's up. Like, I
Mhm.
think there's vulnerability, and I think there's just like, "Look, this is" I out myself, like, constantly, and so, yeah, it's, like, honoring if Trip on This isn't flow, that's why Life with Kat Walsh will chill, and I'm creating episodes with Life with Kat Walsh based on what's happening in my life. So I just did, like, a quick, like, one-minute video right before this just talking about kinda what I was saying about reaction and fear because I
Mhm.
quite literally lived that experience, and so then I just shared my own experience of that and also the message that I heard in case that is helpful for anyone else because we're all
Right.
just mirrors of each other. And so that's where the flow comes in is like, as I learn and get schooled basically by life, I get to share it now on a podcast and express it because, I think one of my gifts coming into this world has been around communication. So I'm like, okay, how can I ground a really big spiritual concept in a way that people can relate to, that they can understand, that it's not so kind of like woo woo and out there that they're like, but
Mhm.
what does that mean for my life? And so I try to do that with Life with Kat Walsh as it applies to my life.
Mhm.
So,
I love that. And I love that you're creating like a living biography,
yeah.
of yourself. And
Yeah.
I think starting at that really kind of that beginning phase. I mean, like when if you jump into someone like Eckhart, I'm just like, okay, wait, hold on. What are you talking about? Or I'll listen to some spiritual
Yeah.
teachers. I'm like, you guys are so over my head. I'm getting it. I'm kind of getting it, but not like really getting it. So I
Yeah.
think it's so important, this work that you're doing, because you're really just starting out in this very like infancy kind of space and just being really open and honest about it. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially as we move more and more into this age of Aquarius,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
spiritual opening and awakening, and people are looking for journeys. They're looking for people who are very real about this process, because you can jump to the gurus, but sometimes it just feels so detached from you. Like, what does even living in the present moment mean? I remember going through
Yeah.
my kind of awakening and everyone talking about being versus doing. And I'm like, what does that even mean?
I know.
Being being what? Like,
Yeah.
and just
I
trying
deal with
not to
that one
think.
all the time. That's such a good I because being is the hardest because being comes down to trust again. Are
Mm,
you saying that me sitting on my couch, quite literally doing nothing, is what I need to be doing, not doing? Because the ego
yeah,
wants to keep doing because we don't believe that if we're not actually doing, that we're not creating the life of our dreams. It gets scared. At least I
right.
do. That's what I find is like there's a guilt around being. I was like, okay, but all the spiritual teachers keep saying be, and yet again, because society doesn't tell you to be. Society tells you to the world at large. We work ourselves to death pretty much
Yeah,
to
lots
create the
of
life of our
doing
dream.
and
Hustle
lots of
culture.
doing for other people,
Yeah.
like really being a cog in the machine instead of creating your own life. And I mean, one of the things I think is so amazing about humans is that we are creative beings. I think if there are aliens out there watching us, they've just got to be like, look at all that stuff they're creating. Look at
Yeah.
the way they can just take an idea, a thought, and then produce, like something. It's just amazing to me. And if more of us would do that, I think our systems would improve. I think we would create new systems that people would choose over the ones that don't work anymore. But we're
Yeah.
so afraid to step out of the box, so afraid to harness our own flow, to really trust our intuition. And you are a great example of what life can look like when you just listen to your heart and you pursue it wholeheartedly, even when it's hard.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's look, I always say like I'm doing it the very extreme way. People don't have to do it as extreme as I do. Like I think I'm living it extreme just to make it more of an example of like a whole new way, but like
Mm,
All I can say is, like, there is nothing more worthwhile
mm,
than to just go for something, even if it doesn't work. To know you at least tried. There's nothing more to just look at, like, what you've done, and I'm sure you've done this too, Eva, and look at, like, your podcast and the work you've done, you're like, "Look what I did." No matter what anyone says about it, like, "I did it. I did that."
yep.
I can't tell you what that does for your soul, for your sense of self, for your well-being, for that self-love to be like, I push through the fear because we know we keep the count of our own lives. We know that times we're having a crisis of faith. We know the times that we've gotten through. And when we get through it, it's like, I did that. And every little win like that fortifies the soul, it fortifies us. And you are forever changed, forever.
Mhm.
And the thing is, even if you go for something and it doesn't quite work, it's taking you somewhere else. There's your trajectory is always forward. We're always moving forward, you know? And it's like, do we want to be on the highest path forward, or do we want to be on like a more mediocre side of things? Like for
Mhm.
me, there will always there's no back for me ever. No matter what happens with Trip on This and Life with Kat Walsh, I will always be continuing to follow flow and joy and what should I be doing and what do I want to be doing. I'm never just going to be like, well, throw in the towel and like back to the cog, as you said. Like, no way.
Yeah.
And it will open that up. And the thing is, like, I really believe like nature, what's the I think Terrence McKenna is it nature favors the courageous.
Mm,
Wherever
absolutely.
whatever you choose, trust that, like, you're going exactly where you need to go. But the worst is regret, like, there's nothing that is the worst, when you could be like, "I should've." I say that
Mhm.
about, like, hot dudes that I'll pass. I'm like, "Should've talked to them."
Hey, you can't
Should've
mess
been
up
my
what
husband,
you're
but oh
doing.
well.
Your
Just kidding.
hot dude will come in. Don't you worry about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I love it. Kat Walsh, such a pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much for being on this podcast and for sharing your story. I wish you the absolute best of luck with everything. And thank you so much for being an example of like someone really living in their flow.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and thank you for having a podcast that features flow. It's so important. So, thank you, Eva.
Great having you.
Thanks.